Prophecies, there are thousands of them in the Bible, where God tells us in advance what will happen, and then it actually does to the letter. So with God's track record at 100% correct, the Bible is a book we really need to be paying attention to, especially because the world is changing so fast. And we need to know what's coming next. What's next on the prophetic timeline? What's going to start happening according to what the Bible tells us? Today we're going to begin a new series with Joel Richardson, where each week we're going to see a prophecy that has been fulfilled so that you can see that the Bible's true. And then we're going to see a prophecy yet to be fulfilled so that we can see that what's coming next. Today we're going to start the series and talk about, for today's lesson, why studying prophecy is so incredibly important. Join us today. Good morning, Joel. I'm so excited that you're doing this with us. Thank you for, it's just fun to always have you here. We're going to do a 12-week summer series, and Joel said that he would help me work through this. The goal for the series is really, it has this overarching theme of evangelism, of telling people about Jesus, but by using biblical prophecy to do that. I started thinking about this because I think there's a lot of people who don't believe the Bible. And if they don't believe the Bible's true, then they're not going to believe that, Jesus who's in the Bible is true. So I think that biblical prophecy is maybe a door into that. And I'll start here and say Hugh Ross, and I don't know what numbers you have, Joel, but Hugh Ross says there's about 2,500 Bible prophecies. I'm assuming that number can go up or down depending on, who's actually counting. But a biblical prophecy is something that God has told us is going to happen, and then it either has already happened or it will be fulfilled in future. And what Hugh Ross says is there's about 2,000 biblical prophecies that have already been fulfilled, which leaves about 500 left for end times. Is that sort of your thinking on that or not?
Lisa, first, thanks for having me on. It's always great to be with you. I'm not sure regarding, quantifying or, calculating exactly how many prophecies have been fulfilled versus those that are not. And as you said, there's going to be quite a variety of opinion there. My focus and my point is really that as Christians, we should be far more familiar with biblical prophecy, which prophecies actually have been fulfilled, which are yet to be fulfilled. We should be far more familiar with this than we are. The bottom line is biblical prophecy, in a lot of ways, it's become sort of this weird sideshow within the church with a lot of sensationalism, a lot of hype and just weirdness. But the reality is, from the beginning to the end, this is overwhelmingly, arguably, the single greatest source of arguing in favor of the Bible. And so obviously, if we're trying to convince the world that this book is true, we want the world to believe that this book is true because we want the best for them. Then it's critical that we learn how to rightly handle biblical prophecy, that we rightly understand, as you said, some of the prophecies that have been fulfilled, some that are yet to be fulfilled. When I look at the New Testament, I mean, overwhelmingly, like it is such a common statement that it's easy to miss. But you repeatedly see this statement, this was to fulfill that which was spoken of through the prophets. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. This was to fulfill this particular prophecy. And these type of things. So to the first century, Jewish mind, this was critical. If they wanted to prove to someone that what they were saying is true, oftentimes, yes, they used the power of the Holy Spirit. They prayed for the sick, silver and gold have I none, but what I do have, I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ, rise up and walk. So obviously, there's nothing more powerful than seeing a miracle. But when it comes to what's coming out of their mouths, their arguments, they're not primarily arguing from philosophy or history. They're primarily arguing from the biblical prophets, and they assume that their audience has some familiarity with these things. And so I would argue that, look, today there's more interest in the end times, I would almost say outside of the church,
Right.
or as much outside of the church as there is in the church. And we need to recognize this. Even unbelievers sense that something is wrong with the world, that something's going on, and they want to understand it. And so they're flocking to YouTube and TikTok and this sort of thing to try to get information. And there's a lot of craziness out there. There's a lot of, sort of, I'll say biblical prophecy in the vein of like science fiction, conspiracy theories that are all intertwined with politics and these type of things. And I'm not saying all of that is complete hogwash, but there's definitely a lot of it that is. And so we need to be responsible students of the scriptures, that when someone comes to us, we can open the Bible, we can point to events that are unfolding out there in the world right now, in the news, like in the news today, and say, this which you are witnessing, this which we are witnessing, this is to fulfill the words of the biblical prophets. And I think that is actually the most biblical argument that we can make. But as I said, unfortunately, I would say the majority of Christians today really are not able to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just did a video, and I'm calling it, is your church coddling you or preparing you? Because my fear is that we're being so coddled that very few, let's just say, are even looking into the Bible to see prophecy, to see what's been fulfilled, what is coming. So I think when it all starts, we've talked about this before. I think we're going to have so many people that are completely unprepared. But for me, prophecy also helps me with the times of doubt in my life. I think we all go through doubts like, oh, am I really believing the right thing? And do I really believe the Bible is true? And whenever that happens, I always go back to prophecy. And I say, any book that has been, that God says this is going to happen, and it does as many times as it has, to me, that just solidifies my faith. And so I kind of think, and that's another good reason for having, sort of studying biblical prophecy. Talk to me about so what we're going to do for this series is each week Joel's going to show us a biblical prophecy that has been fulfilled and a biblical prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled, and it probably will have something to do with end times, the return of Jesus, the rapture, whatever. So I just wanted to use this first session to just kind of introduce what we're going to do and just kind of get your thoughts on, you came up with it, apocalyptic evangelism. And I think it's brilliant. So talk to me about where that came from and what was your thought process behind it?
Yeah, no, I think I actually stole that term from a friend named Reggie Kelly. Reggie is an amazing man. He's a real spiritual father to a lot of people, brilliant individual. And he used the term apocalyptic evangelism. I thought a slightly easier term would just be prophetic evangelism, which again is just the ability to articulate and explain the biblical prophets.
Right.
I have a funny story. I've got a bunch of buddies. We go camping every year down in the Ozarks. These are all guys that I've known, from church for 30 years. And we've been going down to the same campground, really two different campgrounds for like 20 years now. And the one that we've been going to for about 10 years, we went down just a couple of years ago, and I got there a little late. A bunch of the guys we always take the same camping spot. And we're sitting there and around the fire. I got there late and they were already there. And about an hour in, one of the guys says, "Well, are you ready for the news?" And I said, "What news?" And he said, "Campground's abandoned." Apparently the owners had, gotten wrapped up in drugs or something and just lost the campground. And I said, "Wait a minute. You mean we're just sitting here squatting at a campground out in the woods in the Ozarks? Like this is dangerous." And they said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And so we're sitting there, and around midnight, we see some lights through the trees, and a car pulls up. And we're like, okay, great. Now it's midnight. Do we go over there with our headlights on? approach them? Do we wait for them to approach us and this sort of thing? So we all kind of walked over, hello and so forth. Well, what it turns out is that there was a couple who had just driven down from Kansas City, so about 4 hours away, and they had just purchased the property that day. So the owners had lost it, they had purchased it, and they came over and sat down with us. He was just, I believe he was an electrician. His girlfriend was a bartender, and they were buying this property because literally what they said to us was they said, the guy, he goes, look, I was kind of raised in church. I used to go to church with my grandmother. She doesn't go to church. He was talking about his girlfriend. He said, but he goes, when I look out at what's going on in the world right now, it seems like everything that I used to hear when I was a kid from the Bible is coming to pass. And she basically said the same thing. She said, yeah, we're going to build like a little end times farm down here so we can ride out the end of the world. And I go, okay, so here are unbelievers. Again, an electrician and a bartender. He used to go to church a little bit when he was a kid. I go, if unbelievers they have enough discernment to look out at the earth, they can't piece together which prophecy fulfills this or what that means, but they can sense that something is happening. I would say that we as believers would be wise to learn how to rightfully use these tools that the Lord has given us and to articulate these things for a hungry world who is looking for answers. They're looking for someone who can explain these things. And if we don't, then they're going to get caught up in all these weird, again, YouTube conspiracy theory channels, and there's plenty of that. So one, we need to recognize this moment of opportunity that we're in.
Right.
If indeed we are approaching the last days, then now more than ever, we need to rightly handle the word of truth. And second, as I said, when you simply survey the New Testament, you look at the words of Jesus, you look at the apostles, you look at their methodology. How did they convince others that what they were saying is true, that Jesus really was the Messiah, that they really were his apostles? They pointed to real world events, ground reality, things that were unfolding right in front of their hearers. And they connected it to biblical prophecy. This which you now see right in front of you, this is to fulfill the words of the biblical prophets. So I think as I said, it's very important that we recognize the moment that we're in, that we learn the biblical story, that we know the story that the Bible's telling. We know our place in the story, where we are in the story, and we know which verses to point to help unbelievers to see the truth of this book and this mandate, this gospel that we're ambassadors of.
Right. So how would you talk to somebody? Like how would you use prophecy if you're just talking to like the guy at the guy that you met with, the electrician and his girlfriend? Like, is that an opportunity for you to be like, well, let me tell you something? Here's my YouTube channel, whatever. But I mean, how do you start a conversation? Like for me, it would be like, wow, you don't believe the Bible, but here's why you should believe the Bible, because there's been all these prophecies fulfilled, but people don't even know what a prophecy is, it seems like. So how would you start? If we're going to evangelize this way, how do you do it?
Well, you could start out with some teasers. You could bait the hook. You'd say, well, if you really want to understand what's unfolding in the world today, the Bible, has a lot of great answers. The Bible actually predicted these things. The Bible's actually filled with prophecies that actually speak to many of the things that we see unfolding in the earth right now. These type of statements, which are intended to spur further conversation and questions. And so you start out, I would say, with a very broad funnel, and then you start narrowing that funnel down to the specifics. And really, that's sort of what I've done in the different prophecies that we're going to look at. Because as you said, we're going to do about 12 sessions. We could do this like literally until I die. We could go through every prophecy of the Bible.
Yeah, we could do this every week. We're fine.
Yeah. But no, so I think you start out with the big ones, the general things, and then you start narrowing down. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start out in a very broad way, look at some prophecies about the coming of the Messiah and the Jewish people as a nation, how they fulfill prophecy. And then we're going to get into some specifics like, well, does the Bible say that the Jewish temple would be rebuilt? What does it say about the red heifers and some of these more specific prophecies that are also important to understand?
How do you get people to weed through? I was at somewhere this weekend, and I had two different people come up to me and tell me about eclipses and moons and all of this stuff on like and numbers, and I'm like, I don't know, we just need to stick to like the Bible because I think a lot of people are adding in things that, and maybe it's, I've never seen it myself, but maybe, they're taking little bits and pieces and then they're adding their own. I think, would that fall into the category of just kind of people going a wacky direction or not?
Yeah, look, when you when you survey Christian history, there are a handful of huge mistakes that we as futurists, and when I say futurists, that's to say we believe that the overwhelming majority, the burden, the focus of the Bible from a prophetic perspective are things that are yet to be fulfilled. So futurists believe that most of the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25, we believe that the majority of these things, or the primary emphasis of these prophecies, is the future. That they revolve around that time period, around the return of Jesus. Okay, so there are some big mistakes that futurists have made over the years. One of them is antichrist pointing. That's where they're trying to identify every political or theological enemy or boogeyman as the antichrist. It's actually a really sad and kind of funny study. Different individuals have done it. There's a book by Paul Boyer called When Time Shall Be No More. He was a Harvard academic who wrote a book where he actually surveys the history of Christians predicting various individuals to be the Antichrist. And sometimes you'll just get some guy, he was some earl in some county, and he's upset with the duke in the county next door, and he writes a treatise on how this particular guy is the Antichrist. They have these very little worlds. But we all tend to do this. We tend to look out at our world and read it and impose it onto the pages of the Bible, and fail to recognize that the story is first and foremost, it always has been, a very thoroughly Jerusalem-centered story. So Antichrist pointing is a huge problem. One of the other big problems is basically what you're pointing out, which is sensationalism. It's basically going outside of the scriptures. So it's like, I can understand the Bible, but it's the Bible and. So it's the Bible and the Mayan calendar, or it's the Bible and some particular constellation, as we saw back in 2017. Everyone was like, oh, there's this sign in the stars. This clearly means something. Well, it didn't mean anything. Right now, people are going crazy over an eclipse. Well, show me the scriptures that say this particular eclipse means anything. I had some guy on Twitter just yesterday, and he kept posting it over and over again. And it was basically a video that he had taken, someone had taken a picture of the moon, and then they see all of these pictures in the moon. It's like staring at the clouds and going, oh, what do you see? And one person goes, I see the beast. And then the other guy goes, I see a duck drinking a margarita, But the guy who sees the beast, he's convinced that the whole world this is a sign from God. And I go, I'm not seeing what you're seeing here. These type of things. It was literally like images in the moon, and they had to be high. And I'm like, and he's like, you need to pay attention to this. I'm like, look, I have the scriptures. I don't need to look at images that you see in the moon. I don't need to look at images in the clouds. I don't need to obsess about every eclipse, about every constellation, about every Mayan prophecy or some prophecy given by, this guy, that guy, or the other thing. I'm not, and look, and I believe in that there are some people who have a gift of word of knowledge or prophecy. I don't believe those things are completely done away with. But the point is, we need to be responsible students of the scriptures. Oh, and the other thing I would say, so antichrist pointing, looking to things outside of the scriptures. And the third thing sort of falls into the second category, which is obsession with calculations.
Right. And that's what they were saying, like those numbers. I'm thinking, what are you even talking about? So, yeah.
You get a lot of that. Now, look, in fairness, you've got a few statements, particularly in Daniel, the 1,260 days, and the Seventh-day Adventists. You have a lot of Adventist scholars, which I would argue, Mary Baker Eddy, it was a bit of a cult. It's many segments of Adventism have sort of become much more just mainstream evangelical these days, but there are still some who, function in some of the extremes of Adventism. So it is a bit of a cult, but you see in Adventism in particular, this thing called the year or the day year theory.
Okay.
So if something in the book of Daniel says 1,335 days, they go, well, it's actually 1,335 years. So, you'll start out with some sort of conversion there, and then just all these calculations. And then they look at you like, clearly you see it, right? Like, and I'm going, no, I don't. I think that you've just done like a card trick, and some other guy, up the street has a completely different calculations and is arriving at completely different conclusions. And so I would say those three things are things that we really need to avoid. Let's just stick with what the scriptures say. Let's be responsible students of the scriptures. We don't need some outside prophecy. We don't need some extra biblical sign in the stars.
Perfect.
We don't need, to identify Trump or Obama or Hillary or Biden or Gorbachev or any of these, people as the Antichrist. The time is coming when he will be revealed. We don't need some calculator to put everybody's name in to try to figure out if their name comes out to 666. And that's like, again, part of that whole obsession with identifying the Antichrist. We just need to be responsible students of the scriptures.
Perfect. Which is why we're doing this. So yay. Okay. So we will end our session 1, and then we will be back next week with our session 2, where we're actually going to go through some of the scriptures. So thank you for that. That actually helped me, because I'm thinking like, is everyone crazy? And so thank you for making me go, well, they might be. But I love that we've got to stick with the scriptures. And so that's what we're going to start doing. So Joel, thank you for session 1, and we'll see you next week. Okay, we're so glad you're joining us for this series. If you want to know more about Joel Richardson, you can go to joelstrumpet.com. If you want to know more about our ministry, you can go to womensbiblestudy.com, and that's where you can find out everything you want to know about all of us. So I hope this helped you today. Have a really good day.